Why, Spencer? Why? Why? I played the original Battletoads on NES when I was a teenager, and later the arcade beat-em-up at the local mall. I never really considered the property to be much more than a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles also ran, which it was, but I at least appreciated the challenge of the NES original. And the arcade game was fun as hell. True, it borrowed heavily from Turtles in Time, released 3 years earlier, and included bonus levels where you destroyed vehicles as fast as possible, like in Street Fighter II, but it had good graphics for its day, a hard rock soundtrack that sounded like it came straight out of a Genesis, and was non-stop action from start to finish. I say this because aside from the Turbo Tunnel, this new Battletoads takes most of its inspiration from the arcade game, and while the arcade game is definitely my favorite of the two original titles, they got damn near everything wrong here. The story takes place several decades after the original game. The Battletoads, unbeknownst to them but knownst to us, have spent the last 2+ decades buried in an underground simulation bunker, basically playing a virtual reality simulator thinking that they've been gallivanting across the cosmos fighting bad guys for 20+ years. They get rescued by accident, only to discover that they've been gone so long no one remembers or cares who they are, and they're forced to get real jobs. This doesn't last long though, as evil once again rears its ugly head to threaten the galaxy, and so they take off for a new adventure. It's not much of a plot to say the least, but this is a game that claims to be a classic beat-em-up, which never have been big on story to begin with. In fact, I wish it didn't have as much plot as it does. The game is riddled with animated cutscenes that just seem to go on forever, full of what apparently passes for humor these days. The writing comes off as someone who spent their career writing for Steven Universe, trying to replicate the humor and vibe of mid-80s and early 90s cartoons. A perfect example of this is an early scene, where one of them has spent so much time working on a conspiracy theory-style research board trying to piece together what's going on, that he didn't even want to take the time to go to the bathroom, so he's walking around in an adult diaper that's visibly full of shit. It's meant to be a callback to gross outs from shows like Ren and Stimpy, but mixed with the character and story dynamics of Ninja Turtles, all while sporting characterization and rapid-fire line delivery that feels like something out of a modern show like Rick and Morty or Gravity Falls, and it just doesn't work. Every time one of these cutscenes started, and it introduced yet another snarky, fast-talking character who sounded like Pleakley from Lilo and Stitch, I just started playing with my phone until I could get back to the fighting. It's that annoying and that boring. It's nails on the chalkboard of my 80s brain. The obvious motive here was to fashion a plot that would appeal to both adults who grew up in the 80s and kids who think the amazing world of Gumball is high art. It's a fail on both counts. Thank God none of the characters suffer from banana mouth syndrome, but on the other hand, the Queen has gone from looking like an evil dominatrix to an evil soccer mom. The graphics and art design suck. The frame rate never dips, but then again the game never does anything that would test the system enough to cause frame rate dips, so that's not exactly high praise. Whereas the original character designs were more rounded and proportional like the animated Turtles show of the 80s, with some more risque designs to appeal to older players, these new character models are sharp, flat, angular designs that remind one more of early 2000s era Disney animated shows like Kim Possible or Phineas and Ferb, with just enough of that modern CalArt suck to make it all look like an 8th grade art project. This gives it the distinction of looking neither retro nor modern, yet also not being a successful hybrid of the two. If this was a piece of art, I wouldn't hang it in my barn. The animation quality is mostly solid, but the frame rate and juxtaposition of the characters over the backgrounds makes it look like something you might have played on Newgrounds towards the end of its peak. In short, it looks like a Flash game, or something made originally for phones maybe 3 to 5 years ago that's just now been ported to console. The music attempts to recreate the sound of the arcade's Genesis-style rock music, but using either real guitar or synthesized guitar. I honestly can't tell which because of how generic it sounds. The music sounds like watching an 80s sitcom where the characters walk into a record store and nondescript rock music is playing in the background because they didn't want to have to pay for the license of actual rock stars. The whole score sounds like a WCW Jobber's intro music circa 1992. If that was a live guitar player, my hat's off to you, buddy. That had to be the easiest gig you've ever worked. I've run across more challenging chord progressions in a Mel Bay guide. And then there's the gameplay itself. Aside from the turbo tunnel, this game borrows mostly from the arcade game, but it fails to get the feel right. It's mostly a beat-em-up, but the action is maddeningly split up to shoehorn in pointless puzzle sequences and button-mashing minigames. This ruins the whole flow of the gameplay. The controls are responsive enough, though they're needlessly crowded in the control scheme with alternate functions managed by the triggers. You have standard attack, strong attack, a morph move that can be used to break shielded defense, and so on. But then you have right trigger to dash, hold left trigger to use your tongue to grab flies, to pull yourself towards enemies, and other functions. There's 4 different tongue functions, which all work as a combination of LT and a face button. I found it so tedious to use them in combat, I'd just leave flies lying around till I'd killed everything and eat them afterwards for health. I used the dash mostly to get around, so I never really saw much need for pulling myself closer to an enemy, and I only used the ability to grapple the background areas when the game wouldn't let me progress otherwise. And about those morph moves. They were in the arcade game to some extent, but not like this. One in particular is a sort of ground pound where you can leap into the air, turn into a shark, and slam into the enemies beneath you, causing splash damage for any baddies in the vicinity. While it doesn't do much damage, it's still extremely overpowered, as there's no limit to how often you can pull this move, and it stuns anyone that gets hit by it, so you can effectively clear out an entire room by spamming shark until everything is dead. It takes a long time, but it makes progression a joke. They try to balance this with ranged attack enemies that can take out most of your health bar with one shot, but you just have to get behind them and spam that shark dive, timing it to jump over their shots. I played on normal difficulty. I never died and never had to start over at a checkpoint, other than a couple of times on the stage that's essentially a much easier 3D version of the turbo tunnel from the NES game. This is because whenever your toad runs out of health, you automatically switch to one of the other 2 toads, and as you're hitting enemies building your combo meter, the toad who just bowed out slowly renews his health. So it just becomes a cycle of drain one toad, fight for a while, drain that toad, fight for a while, drain the 3rd toad, come back to the 1st toad. And yeah, you can switch toads on the fly to pull off multi-toad combo attacks, but I never really saw a reason to do so. Instead of combat continuing through each stage, the fighting is staggered. You'll come to a big square section and fight a couple of waves. Then you'll walk or run for a while, looking for collectibles to snag with your tongue. Then you'll get another big square area, and another wave will attack. And then you'll come to a closed door or locked elevator, and have to complete one of a couple of repeating puzzle types, then do more walking. Sometimes there's a boss, most times there isn't, but all of them work essentially the same way. Juggle between doing small amounts of damage in spurts while performing crowd control on the endless waves of respawning grunt enemies trying to get in the way of you and the boss. I can only assume this was done because the bosses themselves have such easily avoidable attack patterns that the fight would be over too easily otherwise. It's cheap difficulty padding. And again, since you can just keep respawning your own characters endlessly as you continue to do damage, what was even the point? It also breaks up the flow of gameplay with really stupid and simplistic minigames. A version of rock, paper, scissors called Toad Shambo. A vertical shooter that plays about as good as something you'd experience on the Action 52. A minigame where you're alternating between rubbing a guy's shoulders and trying to destroy your office PC, and so on and so forth. It mostly amounts to mindless button-mashing extended QuickTime events that seem to be more for the visual joke than any actual semblance of fun. Just base distractions to pad out the experience. They're about as fun as the mini-games available for your kids on the digital menu tablets at restaurants these days. Why, Spencer? Why? When you freaking own Rare, why would you license this trash out to a developer I've never even heard of? Why would you, an avid gamer yourself, look at this waste of ones and zeros and say, ah, yes, money well spent. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Battletoads feels more like a small indie developer's homage to Battletoads than an actual Battletoads game. In trying to appeal to both fans of the original and younger kids, it crams in too many ideas and a derivative art style and ends up being a mess that fails to satisfy on any discernible level. It looks cheap, it plays cheap, and thanks to Game Pass, it is cheap, and spared me from having to pay for the privilege of wasting my time to review this trash. Battletoads gets a 3 out of 7. Hey there, how'd you like this review? Drop me a comment and let me know. While you're at it, toss this video a like, why don't you? If you're not subscribed, please do. Don't forget to click the bell so you're notified every time I upload. You can follow me on Twitter, links in the description. If you want to chat with me live, the 7th Cast is held on Twitch every Saturday from 6 to 9 p.m. Central Time. Link is also in the description. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is 7th.